1935 dawns over a Europe still scarred by the Great War, still haunted by its ghosts. The continent stands at a crossroads, caught between the memory of catastrophic conflict and the uneasy peace that followed. In Germany, Adolf Hitler has spent 2 years consolidating his grip on power, dismantling the democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic piece by piece, replacing them with the rigid structures of the Nazi state. His ambitions, once whispered in beer halls, are now broadcast openly across the Reich. The Treaty of Versailles, that cornerstone of the post-war order, has become in his rhetoric not merely unjust, but an existential threat to the German people themselves. Across Europe, the Great Depression continues to cast its shadow. Unemployment, poverty, and political instability feed the rise of extremist movements on both the left and right. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin tightens his authoritarian control while pushing forward ambitious industrialization programs. In Italy, Benito Mussolini dreams of resurrecting the Roman Empire, his eyes fixed on Africa. In Spain, political tensions simmer beneath the surface, ready to explode. And in Britain and France, the two great democratic powers, there is exhaustion, a deep-seated reluctance to contemplate another war, a willingness to seek accommodation, to hope that somehow the aggressive ambitions of dictators can be contained through diplomacy rather than confrontation. The League of Nations, that bold experiment in collective security, has already shown its limitations. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, while the League's response was ineffectual, economic sanctions were proposed but never fully implemented. Moral condemnation was issued but had no practical effect. The lesson was clear to those watching. The League could be defied with impunity. This would not be the last time this lesson would be learned. But in January 1935, as winter grips Europe, few can see just how quickly events will unfold. Few understand that the decisions made in the coming months, the accommodations granted, the lines not drawn, will set the stage for a conflagration that will dwarf even the horrors of the Great War. The road to the Second World War is being paved stone by stone, and 1935 and 1936 will see some of its most critical milestones laid down. Hitler's Germany. A nation transformed by 1935, Germany has become almost unrecognizable from the struggling democracy it was just 2 years earlier. Hitler's ascent to power in January 1933 has been followed by a systematic transformation of German society. The Reichstag fire in February 1933 provided the pretext for emergency decrees that suspended civil liberties. The Enabling Act of March 1933 granted Hitler's government the power to enact laws without parliamentary approval. By the summer of 1933, all political parties except the Nazi Party had been banned or had dissolved themselves. Trade unions were eliminated, replaced by the Nazi-controlled German Labor Front. The press fell under state control. Independent organizations were either absorbed into Nazi structures or destroyed. The Night of the Long Knives in June 1934 eliminated potential rivals within the Nazi movement itself. Ernst Röhm, leader of the Sturmabteilung, the brown-shirted stormtroopers who had been instrumental in Hitler's rise, was murdered, along with dozens of other SA leaders and political opponents. The message was clear. Hitler would tolerate no challenge to his authority, even from within his own movement. When President Paul von Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, becoming both head of government and head of state. The Wehrmacht, the German military, swore a personal oath of loyalty not to the nation or the Constitution, but to Adolf Hitler himself. Yet for many Germans, these changes brought not fear but hope. The Nazi economic program appeared to be working. Unemployment, which had reached catastrophic levels during the Depression, was falling. Massive public works projects, including the construction of the Autobahn highway system, put people back to work. Rearmament, though still largely secret, created jobs in heavy industry. The chaos and political violence that had plagued the Weimar Republic seemed to be over. Many Germans, exhausted by years of instability, were willing to trade political freedom for economic security and national pride. Behind the facade of economic recovery, however, lay a darker reality. The regime's anti-Semitic policies were already taking shape. Jews were systematically excluded from the civil service, from the professions, from cultural life. The April 1933 boycott of Jewish businesses was just the beginning. Books by Jewish authors and other undesirables were burned in public ceremonies. The regime's racial ideology, with its pseudo-scientific theories of Aryan superiority, was becoming embedded in German institutions, taught in schools, propagated through the media. And always there was violence or the threat of violence, the knock on the door in the night, the concentration camps already established for political prisoners, the atmosphere of fear that pervaded daily life for anyone who dared to dissent. By 1935, Hitler feels confident enough to begin openly challenging the international order. The question is no longer whether he will defy the Treaty of Versailles, but when and how far he will go. The world is about to find out. The Saarland, a propaganda triumph. The year 1935 begins with what appears to be a legitimate democratic exercise, but which Hitler will transform into a propaganda victory. The Saarland, a small but economically vital region on Germany's western border, has been under League of Nations administration since the end of the Great War. Rich in coal deposits, industrially developed, the Saarland had been separated from Germany as part of the Treaty of Versailles. France was granted control of the coal mines as partial reparation for German war damage. The treaty stipulated that after 15 years, the inhabitants of the Saarland would vote on their future: reunion with Germany, union with France, or continuation of League administration. That referendum is scheduled for January 13, 1935. The outcome should have been predictable. Lekmehrek dasakmi chi. The Saarland's population is overwhelmingly German-speaking, with deep cultural and historical ties to Germany. But Hitler's rise to power has complicated matters. Many in the Saarland, particularly socialists, communists, and Jews, fear what reunion with Nazi Germany would mean for them. The Nazi regime has already established its brutal character. Political opponents are being arrested, tortured, murdered. Jews are being systematically persecuted. Thousands of refugees from Nazi Germany have sought sanctuary in the Saarland, living under the protection of League administration. The Nazi propaganda machine swings into full operation. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, orchestrates a massive campaign. German identity, national unity, the historic wrong of the Saarland separation from the fatherland. These themes are hammered home relentlessly. The Catholic Church, deeply influential in the traditionally Catholic Saarland, has its own concerns about the Nazi regime's anti-clerical policies, but nationalism ultimately trumps these worries. Even many socialists and communists, despite their opposition to Nazism, cannot bring themselves to vote against reunion with Germany. To do so would feel like a betrayal of their national identity. On January 13th, with international observers present to ensure fairness, the people of the Saarland cast their votes. The result is overwhelming. Over 90% vote for reunion with Germany. Less than 9% vote to maintain the status quo. Fewer than 0.5% vote for union with France. It is a stunning victory for Hitler, achieved through what appears to be a legitimate democratic process. The Nazis waste no time in celebrating. In Germany, church bells ring, flags wave, crowds gather in the streets. Hitler proclaims it a vindication of the German cause, proof that the Treaty of Versailles was unjust, that the German people naturally wish to be united under one government. The international community, unable to dispute the legitimacy of a referendum held under League supervision, can only accept the result. On March 1, 1935, the Saarland is formally reintegrated into Germany. Josef Berkel, a Nazi official, becomes the region's administrator. The refugees who had sought safety there must flee again, many heading to France. For those who cannot escape, there's the terrifying prospect of life under Nazi rule. For Hitler, the Saarland plebiscite is more than just a territorial gain. It is a proof of concept. It shows that nationalist sentiment can be mobilized to override concerns about his regime's character. It demonstrates that the international community will accept the results of popular votes even when those votes benefit Nazi Germany. And it emboldens him to push further. If he can achieve such a triumph through apparently peaceful democratic means, what else might be possible? Rearmament revealed. Tearing up the treaty. The Treaty of Versailles had been designed to prevent Germany from ever again threatening European peace. Its military clauses were comprehensive and strict. The German army was limited to 100,000 men, a professional force without conscription. The General Staff, the elite military planning body that had orchestrated Germany's war effort, was abolished. Germany was forbidden from possessing tanks, heavy artillery, military aircraft, or submarines. The Rhineland, the strategic border region between Germany and France, was to be permanently demilitarized. These restrictions were not merely punitive, they were intended to make German military aggression physically impossible. But from the beginning, the Weimar Republic had sought to circumvent these restrictions. Secret agreements with the Soviet Union allowed German military personnel to train on forbidden weapons on Soviet soil. Aircraft companies maintained the expertise to build military planes by producing civilian models. Industrial capacity that could be converted to weapons production was carefully preserved. Even so, these efforts were limited by the economic crisis and by the need to maintain at least the appearance of compliance with the treaty. Hitler's regime has no such compunctions. From the moment he takes power, rearmament accelerates dramatically. At first, the buildup is covert. Factories that appear to produce civilian goods are designed so they can quickly switch to military production. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, is disguised as a civilian aviation organization. Pilots train in glider clubs, military divisions are camouflaged as police units. But by early 1935, the scale of German rearmament has become impossible to hide. The German military is growing rapidly. Shipyards are constructing vessels that clearly have military purposes. Aircraft that can only be bombers roll off production lines. In February 1935, Hermann Göring, officially the Reich Minister of Aviation, publicly announces what has been an open secret. Germany has rebuilt its air force. The announcement is carefully calculated. Göring frames it as a defensive measure, necessary because other nations have refused to disarm as they had promised under the League of Nations. He portrays Germany not as an aggressor, but as a nation merely seeking equality and security. The international reaction is muted. Britain and France issue formal protests, but take no concrete action. 2 weeks later, on March 16th, Hitler drops the other shoe. In a public announcement, he declares that Germany will reintroduce military conscription and expand its army to 36 divisions, approximately 550,000 men. It is a blatant, undeniable violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler accompanies the announcement with familiar rhetoric. Germany wants only peace. Germany has been left vulnerable while other nations remain heavily armed. Germany is merely seeking equality with other European powers. He offers vague promises of future negotiations, of limitations on armaments, anything to blunt the impact of his violation of the treaty. The international response is predictably outraged, but ultimately toothless. France, alarmed by Germany's growing military strength, extends conscription from 1 year to 2 years. Britain increases its military budget, particularly for coastal and air defenses. Italy makes military preparations of its own. The League of Nations condemns Germany's actions, but none of these responses actually stops Hitler. There is no military intervention, no serious effort to force Germany to comply with the treaty. The great powers issue statements, hold meetings, but take no concrete steps to halt German rearmament. For Hitler, this is a crucial test, and he passes it. He has openly defied the Treaty of Versailles, the cornerstone of the post-war order, and the international community has done nothing substantive to stop him. The lesson is clear. The democracies are unwilling to risk war to enforce the treaty. Their threats are empty. Their protests are mere words. Hitler's confidence grows. If he can rearm Germany with impunity, what else might he dare? The Strasse Front, unity and its unraveling. The international community is not entirely paralyzed. France, alarmed by German rearmament, seeks to build a coalition to contain Hitler. In February 1935, France and the Soviet Union sign a treaty of mutual assistance. It is a strange alliance given the ideological gulf between democratic France and communist Russia, but both nations share a fear of German power. The treaty commits each to provide assistance if the other is attacked by a European power. In practice, the treaty is vague and lacks specific military provisions, but its symbolic importance is significant. In April 1935, the leaders of Britain, France, and Italy meet at the Italian lakeside resort of Stresa. Their goal is to present a united front against further German violations of the Treaty of Versailles. The meeting produces the Stresa Front, an agreement among the three powers to oppose any further German treaty violations, to preserve the independence of Austria, which Hitler is known to covet, and to maintain the existing European borders. For a brief moment, it appears that the great powers might coordinate their response to Hitler. But the Stresa Front is built on fragile foundations. The three nations have different interests and priorities. France is directly threatened by German rearmament and wants strong action. Britain, while concerned about Germany, is more worried about maintaining the balance of power in Europe and avoiding another war. Italy's participation is opportunistic. Mussolini is already planning his own aggressive moves and wants to ensure that Britain and France won't interfere. The front collapses almost before it is fully formed. Just 2 months after the Stresa meeting, Britain, without consulting France or Italy, signs the Anglo-German naval agreement with Germany. The agreement itself violates the Treaty of Versailles, which Britain had just pledged to uphold. Under its terms, Germany is allowed to build a navy up to 35% the size of the Royal Navy's surface fleet and to maintain parity in submarines. The British justification for this extraordinary betrayal is rooted in strategic calculation and fear. Britain's naval planners are confronted with a nightmare scenario, the possibility of having to fight both Germany in European waters and Japan in the Pacific simultaneously. The Royal Navy, while still the world's largest, cannot adequately cover both theaters. The Anglo-German naval agreement is seen as a way to limit the German naval threat to a manageable level. If Germany agrees to keep its navy at 35% of Britain's, then Britain can maintain superiority in European waters while also deploying forces to face Japan. But the agreement has devastating consequences for the Stresa Front. France and Italy are furious. Pierre Laval, France's prime minister, sees it as a betrayal. France had been seeking to build a coalition to contain Germany, and now Britain has given Hitler diplomatic recognition and legitimacy for what should be an illegal naval program. Mussolini draws his own conclusions. If Britain is willing to make separate deals with Germany, then the Stresa Front is meaningless. The great powers talk of unity, but act in their own self-interest. What matters is not international agreements, but strength and the willingness to use it. For Hitler, the Anglo-German naval agreement is another triumph. Not only does it allow him to build a substantial navy, but it also fractures the emerging coalition against him. The Stresa Front, which briefly promised coordinated action, is revealed as hollow. The path forward becomes clearer. The democracies will not act together. They can be divided and manipulated. Each nation will prioritize its own interests over collective security. Mussolini's Ethiopian Gambit. Benito Mussolini watches these events with keen interest. He has ruled Italy since his march on Rome in 1922, transforming the country into a fascist dictatorship. He dreams of making Italy a great power, of reclaiming the glory of the Roman Empire. But Italy remains relatively weak, its economy struggling, its military capabilities limited. Mussolini needs a victory, something to boost Italian prestige and his own standing. His target is Ethiopia, one of the few remaining independent nations in Africa. Italy had attempted to conquer Ethiopia before, in the 1890s, but had been humiliatingly defeated at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, where Ethiopian forces routed a modern European army. That defeat has festered in the Italian national consciousness. Now, Mussolini means to avenge it and claim Ethiopia for his new Roman Empire. A border incident at Walwal in December 1934 provides the pretext. Ethiopian and Italian forces clash at this desert outpost, with casualties on both sides. The incident is murky, the responsibility unclear. Ethiopia appeals to the League of Nations for arbitration. But Mussolini has already decided on war. In the months that follow, Italy masses troops and supplies in its colonies of Eritrea and Italian Somaliland, which border Ethiopia. The buildup is massive and obvious. Ethiopia desperately seeks international support. Emperor Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's ruler, is a sophisticated and eloquent advocate for his nation's cause. He appeals to the League of Nations, to international law, to the principle that nations should be protected from aggression. But Britain and France, the dominant powers in the League, are more interested in keeping Italy as an ally against Germany than in defending Ethiopia. Secret negotiations produce the Laval Pact, a plan to partition Ethiopia and give Italy its best territories. The plan is leaked to the press, and public outrage forces both British and French leaders to disavow it, but the incident reveals their true priorities. On October 3, 1935, without a declaration of war, Italian forces invade Ethiopia from both Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. The invasion is overwhelming in its force. Italy deploys hundreds of thousands of troops, supported by tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Ethiopian forces, brave and determined, are hopelessly outmatched. Emperor Haile Selassie has managed to mobilize approximately 500,000 men, but most are armed with rifles from the 19th century or with spears and swords. They have virtually no artillery, no tanks, no aircraft. It is medieval warfare confronting modern industrial might. The war is brutal and one-sided. Italian forces advance steadily, though not as quickly as Mussolini desires. Ethiopian resistance is fiercer than expected, and the mountainous terrain favors defense. Frustrated by the slow progress, Mussolini orders the use of chemical weapons. Mustard gas is sprayed from aircraft and dispersed from artillery shells. The effects are horrific. Victims suffer terrible burns, blindness, lingering death. International law explicitly forbids the use of chemical weapons, but Mussolini doesn't care. The Italians deny using poison gas, blaming reports on enemy propaganda, but the evidence is overwhelming. The League of Nations declares Italy the aggressor and, for the first time in history, imposes economic sanctions on a member state waging an illegal war. It is a historic moment, a test of whether collective security can actually work. But the sanctions are fatally flawed. They don't include oil, the one commodity that could actually cripple the Italian war effort. Several major powers, including the United States, Germany, and Japan, are not League members and are not bound by the sanctions. Some League members ignore the sanctions entirely. The economic impact on Italy is minimal. The war continues through the winter of 1935 and into 1936. Ethiopian forces mount a Christmas offensive that briefly checks the Italian advance, but superior Italian firepower, combined with the use of chemical weapons, ultimately prevails. In April 1936, Italian forces win a decisive victory at the Battle of Mechu. Ethiopian resistance collapses. On May 5th, Italian troops enter Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital. Emperor Haile Selassie flees into exile. On May 9th, Mussolini appears on the balcony of the Palazzo Venezia in Rome and proclaims the Italian Empire. King Victor Emmanuel III is declared Emperor of Ethiopia. For Mussolini, it is a triumph. Although the victory has come at a cost, Italy is now isolated diplomatically. The League of Nations' failure to stop the invasion has discredited the organization, but Italy's brazen aggression has also made it a pariah. Crucially, the Ethiopian War has destroyed the Stresa Front. Britain and France, already divided by the Anglo-German naval agreement, are further estranged from Italy. Mussolini begins to look for new allies. His gaze turns toward Berlin. The Rhineland Gamble. Hitler's masterstroke. While the world's attention is focused on Ethiopia, Hitler prepares his next move. The Rhineland, the German territory west of the Rhine River, has been demilitarized under the Treaty of Versailles and confirmed in the Locarno Treaties of 1925. Though it is part of Germany, the German military is forbidden to station troops there or build fortifications. This demilitarization is crucial to French security, creating a buffer zone between France and Germany. If Germany could remilitarize the Rhineland, it could build fortifications that would make French defensive operations much more difficult and could threaten France directly. Hitler wants to remilitarize the Rhineland, but he knows it is risky. The Franco-Soviet Pact, signed in 1935, gives him a pretext, allowing him to claim that France has created an encircling alliance that threatens German security. But many of his own generals are opposed to the plan. They argue that Germany's military, though growing, is still not ready for war. If France responds with force, Germany would have to retreat, which would be a humiliating blow to Hitler's prestige and could even threaten his hold on power. Hitler, however, has assessed the international situation shrewdly. Britain and France are distracted by the Ethiopian crisis. The League of Nations is in disarray. France is politically divided in the midst of an election campaign. Britain has shown repeatedly that it will not risk war to enforce the Treaty of Versailles. Most importantly, neither Britain nor France has the stomach for another war. The memory of the Great War, with its massive casualties and futile slaughter, still haunts both nations. Hitler gambles that they will not act. On March 7, 1936, at dawn, German troops march into the Rhineland. It is a deliberately modest force, only about 20,000 men, and they have orders to withdraw immediately if they meet resistance. The operation is codenamed Winter Exercise, a name chosen to suggest routine training rather than aggression. Hitler accompanies the military move with his usual rhetoric. He claims the Franco-Soviet Pact has violated the Locarno treaties, which explicitly forbade such alliances. He portrays the remilitarization as a purely defensive measure. He even offers a series of peace proposals, including non-aggression pacts and limits on armaments, all designed to muddy the waters and divide potential opponents. The reaction from France and Britain is exactly what Hitler hoped for. France is caught in political turmoil. Prime Minister Albert Sarraut wants to respond forcefully, but his government is a caretaker administration awaiting elections. The French military, despite having overwhelming superiority in numbers and equipment, tells the government that any military response would require full mobilization, which would take weeks and be enormously expensive. Most crucially, France does not want to act without British support, and Britain makes clear it will not support military action. British public opinion sees the remilitarization as, in the words of Lord Lothian, merely the Germans walking into their own backyard. Many in Britain believe the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh on Germany and that some of its provisions were unjust. The British government, led by Stanley Baldwin, has no desire to risk war over what is, after all, German territory. The crisis passes without any military response. For Hitler, the Rhineland remilitarization is his greatest triumph yet. He has directly violated both the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno treaties, and the great powers have done nothing. He has called their bluff and won. Later, Hitler will admit that the Rhineland operation was his greatest gamble. If France had responded with force, Germany would have had to retreat, and the humiliation might have ended his regime. But France and Britain did not act, and Hitler's prestige soars both in Germany and internationally. The perception takes hold that Hitler is a bold leader who gets results, while Britain and France are weak and indecisive. The remilitarization has profound strategic consequences. Germany immediately begins building fortifications in the Rhineland, constructing what will become the Siegfried Line. These fortifications make any French offensive into Germany far more difficult and costly. France's military strategy has been based on the ability to respond to German aggression by invading Germany through the Rhineland. That option is now foreclosed. France is forced back onto the defensive, relying on the Maginot Line and hoping that allies will come to its aid if war breaks out. The balance of power in Europe has shifted decisively in Germany's favor. Spain erupts civil war as rehearsal. While Germany consolidates its position in the Rhineland, Spain descends into civil war. Spain in 1936 is a deeply divided nation. The Republican government, elected in February 1936 as a coalition of liberals, socialists, and communists, known as the Popular Front, seeks to modernize Spain, reducing the power of the Catholic Church and the traditional landed aristocracy. But these reforms face fierce opposition from conservatives, monarchists, the military, and the Catholic Church. In July 1936, military officers launch a coup against the Republican government. Led by General Francisco Franco, who flies from the Canary Islands to Morocco to take command of Spain's Army of Africa, the rebels quickly seize control of Morocco, much of northern Spain, and several key cities in the south. But the coup fails to achieve its objective of swiftly overthrowing the government. The Republican government distributes weapons to workers' militias, and after fierce fighting, maintains control of Madrid, Barcelona, and other major cities. Spain splits in two. The nationalists, as the rebels are called, control much of northern and western Spain, including the traditional strongholds of conservatism. The Republicans hold the more industrialized and urbanized regions. Both sides engage in brutal repression. Tens of thousands are executed in political purges in both nationalist and Republican zones. The violence is indiscriminate and horrific. Priests are murdered by leftist militias. Trade unionists and suspected leftists are shot by nationalist firing squads. The Spanish Civil War becomes a struggle not just for power, but for the very soul of Spain. The war immediately attracts international attention and involvement. A non-intervention committee is established, and most major powers publicly pledge not to intervene. But it is a farce. The Soviet Union begins supplying the Republicans with weapons, advisors, and international brigade volunteers from around the world. Germany and Italy intervene massively on behalf of Franco's nationalists. For Hitler and Mussolini, the Spanish Civil War is both a testing ground for their military forces and an opportunity to support a sympathetic regime. Hitler sends the Condor Legion, an Air Force unit that will become infamous for its bombing campaigns against civilian targets. The Condor Legion provides crucial air support to nationalist forces and uses Spain as a laboratory to test new tactics and weapons. The bombing of Guernica on April 26, 1937, though it occurs after the period covered here, will become the war's most notorious atrocity, immortalized by Picasso's painting. Italy's involvement is even more substantial. Mussolini sends tens of thousands of troops, along with aircraft, tanks, and other military equipment. The Italian forces perform poorly in several engagements, but their sheer numbers and equipment make a significant difference. The Spanish Civil War becomes a proxy conflict, a rehearsal for the larger war to come. It reveals the weaknesses of the democracies, their reluctance to act decisively, and the willingness of the fascist powers to intervene militarily to achieve their goals. The Axis forms, alliance of necessity. By the autumn of 1936, the international landscape has shifted dramatically. The Stresa Front is dead. The League of Nations has been humiliated by its failure to stop the Italian invasion of Ethiopia and the German remilitarization of the Rhineland. Britain and France have shown themselves unwilling to use military force to uphold the post-war order. Germany and Italy, both international pariahs, find common cause. On October 25, 1936, Germany and Italy sign an agreement, negotiated by Italy's Foreign Minister, Galeazzo Ciano, and Germany's Foreign Minister, Konstantin von Neurath. The agreement commits the two nations to a common foreign policy, particularly regarding the Spanish Civil War and opposition to communism. On November 1st, Mussolini announces the agreement in a speech in Milan. He proclaims that all European countries will henceforth rotate around the Rome-Berlin axis. The term axis captures something essential about the alliance. It is not a traditional alliance of mutual interest and shared values. Rather, it is an axis around which other nations must orient themselves. It is an alliance born of isolation and opportunism. Both Hitler and Mussolini have defied the international order and found themselves diplomatically isolated. Both are pursuing aggressive foreign policies. Both oppose communism and the Soviet Union. Yet both seek to revise the post-war settlement in their favor. Yet the alliance has its contradictions and tensions. Mussolini, who came to power first, initially saw himself as the senior partner, the experienced statesman guiding the younger, more impetuous Hitler. But Germany's rapid rearmament and Hitler's boldness in the Rhineland have shifted the balance. Germany is becoming the dominant power. The alliance will prove durable enough to survive into the Second World War, but it will always be marked by mutual suspicion, competing interests, and unequal power. The Rome-Berlin axis is more than just a bilateral agreement. It represents a fundamental challenge to the post-war order. Two major European powers have openly rejected the rules-based international system established after the Great War. They have shown that aggression can succeed, that treaties can be violated with impunity, that the League of Nations is powerless to stop determined aggressors. The Axis becomes a magnet for other revisionist powers, setting the stage for the broader Axis alliance that will fight the Second World War. The Olympics, propaganda and deception. In August 1936, the world gathers in Berlin for the Summer Olympics. It is a moment of international celebration, a showcase for athletic achievement, a symbol of peaceful international competition. But for Hitler and the Nazi regime, the Olympics are above all a propaganda opportunity, a chance to display the new Germany to the world. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, orchestrates the event with meticulous care. Berlin is transformed, anti-Semitic signs are temporarily removed, the persecution of Jews is toned down, at least in public. Foreign visitors see a modern, efficient, orderly Germany. New Olympic facilities impress with their scale and modernity. The opening ceremony is a spectacular display of Nazi pageantry. Leni Riefenstahl's film of the Olympics will become a landmark in cinematic propaganda. The games themselves present both triumphs and complications for Nazi ideology. German athletes perform well, winning the most medals. But Jesse Owens, an African-American sprinter, wins 4 gold medals, directly contradicting Nazi racial theories about Aryan superiority. Hitler's refusal to shake Owens's hand becomes an embarrassing incident, though its significance is somewhat exaggerated in later retellings. Many foreign visitors come away impressed. Germany appears to have recovered from the chaos of the Depression years. Employment is high. The streets are safe. The German people seem unified and purposeful. The more sinister aspects of the regime, the concentration camps, the persecution of political opponents, the plans for aggressive expansion are hidden from view. Some visitors, particularly in Britain, return home with favorable impressions of Hitler and the Nazi regime. They see Hitler as a strong leader who has restored German prosperity and national pride. But behind the Olympic facade, darker plans are being laid. In that same month, Hitler issues secret orders for the 4-year plan, a massive economic program designed to prepare Germany for war. Under Hermann Göring's direction, the plan focuses on achieving autarky, economic self-sufficiency, particularly in strategic materials. Germany must be able to wage war without depending on imports that could be cut off by blockade. The plan calls for massive increases in the production of synthetic fuels, synthetic rubber, and other strategic materials. The 4-year plan reveals Hitler's true intentions. He is not seeking peace, but preparing for war. His target is the Soviet Union, which he views as the homeland of Jewish Bolshevism, Germany's existential enemy. Hitler believes that Germany must conquer living space in the East, destroying the Soviet Union and subjugating or exterminating its Slavic population. The alternative, in his racial worldview, is Germany's own destruction. All of Nazi Germany's policies, all of its economic planning, all of its diplomatic maneuvers are oriented toward this ultimate goal. The contrast between the Olympic spectacle and the 4-year plan encapsulates the nature of Nazi Germany in 1936. On the surface, there is modernity, efficiency, national pride, even a veneer of international respectability. Beneath the surface, there's a regime planning for aggressive war, driven by a racist ideology that sees conflict as inevitable and desirable, willing to risk the destruction of European civilization in pursuit of its goals. East Asia, Japan's expansion, and China's unity. While Europe's attention is focused on German and Italian aggression, developments in East Asia are equally ominous. Japan, like Germany and Italy, is a revisionist power, dissatisfied with the post-war order, seeking to expand its empire at the expense of its neighbors. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. The League of Nations condemned the invasion, but took no effective action, teaching the same lessons that Hitler would later absorb. Aggression can succeed, and international institutions are powerless to stop it. By 1936, Japan's military, particularly the army, has gained enormous influence over Japanese politics. Civilian politicians who oppose military expansion are intimidated, assassinated, or marginalized. In February 1936, young army officers launch a coup attempt, assassinating several senior politicians and briefly occupying parts of Tokyo. The coup fails, and the ringleaders are executed. But the incident further strengthens the military's grip on power and demonstrates the depth of extreme nationalist sentiment within the officer corps. Japan continues its expansion in China. The Japanese army in Manchuria pushes westward into Inner Mongolia, establishing another puppet regime in the region of Mengjiang. Japanese forces probe southward, testing Chinese resolve. For the moment, an uneasy truce holds with Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government, but tensions are rising. Within China itself, a dramatic event in December 1936 changes the political landscape. Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of China's nationalist government, has been focused on destroying the communist forces under Mao Zedong rather than confronting Japanese aggression. He travels to Xi'an to coordinate operations against the communists, but his local commander, Zhang Shuiliang, has other ideas. Zhang and his officers arrest Chiang and hold him until he agrees to form a united front with the communists to resist Japan. The Xi'an incident, as it becomes known, leads to the formation of the Second United Front, an alliance between the nationalists and communists against Japan. It is an uneasy alliance, born of desperation rather than genuine reconciliation. Both sides maintain their separate armies and political structures. Both continue to distrust each other deeply. But the United Front shifts Chinese strategy from civil war to resistance against Japanese aggression. It sets the stage for the full-scale Sino-Japanese War that will erupt in 1937. The developments in East Asia mirror those in Europe in important ways. An aggressive militaristic power is expanding at the expense of weaker neighbors. International institutions prove unable to check that expansion. Democratic powers, preoccupied with their own concerns, are unwilling to intervene decisively. Indeed, the world is dividing into camps, with the fascist powers on one side and the democracies on the other, while the Soviet Union pursues its own interests, sometimes aligning with one side, sometimes with the other. The world watches, isolation and appeasement. As 1936 draws to a close, the patterns that will lead to the Second World War are becoming clear. Germany, Italy, and Japan are pursuing aggressive expansionist policies, violating international law, defying the League of Nations, building up their military forces. Britain and France, the dominant democratic powers, are unwilling to risk war to stop them. The Soviet Union, under Stalin's brutal dictatorship, is focused on internal consolidation and building its own military strength, wary of both Nazi Germany and the capitalist democracies. In the United States, isolationist sentiment remains strong. A 1936 opinion poll finds that 95% of Americans oppose involvement in any future foreign war. The Neutrality Acts passed by Congress prohibit the sale of arms to belligerent nations, a policy designed to prevent the United States from being drawn into foreign conflicts. Many Americans believe that the country's entry into the Great War was a mistake, that the nation was manipulated by arms manufacturers and European powers into a conflict that served no American interest. The determination to avoid a repetition is overwhelming. Britain, too, is dominated by a desire to avoid war. The British Empire faces challenges across the globe, from Arab revolt in Palestine to independence movements in India. The British military is spread thin, trying to police a vast empire while also preparing for potential conflicts in Europe and Asia. British politicians and much of the public believe that some of Germany's grievances are legitimate, that the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh, that accommodation with Hitler is possible and preferable to war. France, perhaps more clear-eyed about the German threat, is nevertheless hamstrung by political division and doubt about British support. The Maginot Line, that massive chain of fortifications along France's border with Germany, represents not just a military strategy, but a psychological retreat, a defensive mindset that hopes to deter aggression rather than confront it directly. The year 1936 sees several symbolic moments that capture the changing international mood. In December, King Edward VIII of Britain abdicates to marry an American divorcee. His abdication is welcomed by many who knew of his sympathies for Nazi Germany and his belief that Britain should seek accommodation with Hitler. His brother, who becomes King George VI, will lead Britain through the war to come, but in December 1936, that war still seems avoidable. The road to war is not yet inevitable. There are still off-ramps, still opportunities for the international community to check aggression before it becomes unstoppable. But those opportunities are slipping away. Each success emboldens the aggressors. Each failure to act weakens the credibility of those who might stop them. The League of Nations, that hopeful experiment in collective security, is revealed as impotent. The great powers prioritize their own interests over international cooperation. The mechanisms that might prevent war are failing. Conclusion: crossroads and consequences. As 1936 ends, Europe stands at a crossroads. 2 years of Hitler's increasingly bold challenges to the international order have revealed the weakness and division of the democracies. The Saarland plebiscite, German rearmament, the remilitarization of the Rhineland. Each violation of the Treaty of Versailles has been met with protests but no action. Mussolini has conquered Ethiopia while the League of Nations watched helplessly. The Spanish Civil War has become a testing ground for fascist military power. The Rome-Berlin axis has formalized the alliance of the revisionist powers. The patterns of the coming war are visible to those willing to see them. The fascist powers are aggressive, expansionist, willing to use military force to achieve their goals. They share a contempt for democracy, for international law, for the very concept of a rules-based international order. They are preparing for war, building up their militaries, testing their weapons, probing the resolve of potential opponents. The democracies, by contrast, are divided, uncertain, desperately hoping to avoid another war. They are pursuing a policy that will later be called appeasement, though at the time it seems like simple realism. They are trying to distinguish between legitimate grievances and illegitimate demands, hoping that by addressing the former, they can prevent the latter. They are clinging to the belief that reasonable people can negotiate, that common interests can be found, that somehow catastrophic war can be avoided. The Soviet Union under Stalin is pursuing its own path, building up its industrial and military capacity, conducting brutal purges of its own officer corps, watching the capitalist democracies and fascist dictatorships with equal suspicion, seeking security through strength rather than international cooperation. The United States remains aloof, determined not to be drawn into European conflicts, focused on its own recovery from the Depression, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that its interests are also at stake in the struggles playing out across the Atlantic and Pacific. The crucial insight, visible in hindsight, but harder to see in the moment, is that the aggressors have correctly assessed the weakness of the international order. They understand that the democracies will not risk war to enforce treaties or protect distant nations. They grasp that each successful violation makes the next one easier, that momentum and perception matter, that appearing strong and resolute provides advantages over appearing reasonable and accommodating. The road to the Second World War has many milestones, many moments when different choices might have led to different outcomes. But 1935 and 1936 are crucial years. These are the years when Hitler establishes that he can violate the Treaty of Versailles with impunity. These are the years when the League of Nations is exposed as powerless. These are the years when the axis of fascist powers begins to form. These are the years when the patterns that will lead to global war become visible, locked in, increasingly difficult to reverse. The world in 1936 does not yet know that it is sliding toward the most destructive war in human history. But the warning signs are there, the lessons are being taught, The choices are being made that will shape the catastrophe to come. In just 3 years, Germany will invade Poland and the Second World War will begin. But the war really starts here, in these years of unopposed aggression, failed deterrence, and the gradual dissolution of the post-war order. If you found this exploration of 1935 and 1936 engaging and educational, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating these deep dives into the atmosphere and history of World War II. Thank you for watching.